Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on Papermills. So these are organisations that produce and sell fraudulent research papers. And this issue is really threatening the integrity of research publishing and trust in publishers and research. So today we'll explore how the community has come together as United2Act, a joint initiative by COPE and the STM Association to address the collective challenge of paper mills in scholarly publishing and to create a toolkit for researchers, for librarians, publishers and editors. So my name is Sarah Phibbs. I'm the Director of Equity and Inclusion at the STM Association, and I'm also Director of Research4Life Partnership, representing the 200 odd publishers who are contributing content to the Research4Life portal. So I'm hosting this webinar. I'm joined by Victoria Babbitt, Director of Researcher Development and Outreach at Taylor and Francis. You may recognise her. She is a very active member of the Research4Life Capacity Development Committee and has experience with many trainings. So say hi, Victoria.
Hi, everyone.
Super. So I'm delighted also to welcome our speaker, Jigisha Patel, who's formerly a medical doctor, clinical researcher and medical journal editor, now an independent research integrity specialist. She's also an independently elected member of COPE, the Committee for Publication Ethics, and a member of the working group for United2Act. So she's bringing extensive experience of ethics and integrity to our webinar today. Say hi, Jigisha.
Hi, everyone.
Super. So first, a few housekeeping notes. Do introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're coming from. It's wonderful to see people here from Canada, Malawi, Bhutan. And this session is being recorded and will be available afterwards on the Research4Life website. So please don't record or add AI transcription services. You can turn on closed captions. And if you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your video. We will mute everyone, but please use the chat for questions, and Victoria is going to host our question session at the end. If you experience any technical issues, try rejoining using your confirmation link. And a final reminder that we'll follow the Research4Life Code of Conduct, so we expect all participants to engage respectfully and professionally throughout the session. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you that. So now let's get started with a poll. And we have 3 questions. And I'll introduce you to Michael from Itoka, who's working behind the scenes to make our webinar run smoothly. So Michael, get the polls off to a good start. Okay, super. Here we are. So question 1 is, who are you? Are you a researcher, an editor, publisher, a librarian, or other person based in an academic institution? So if you'd like to get the QR code or start taking part in the poll, please do. So we see we have quite a few publishers, some librarians. Everyone able to do the poll? If you get stuck, please post in chat and I'm sure we can help you figure it out. Okay, so we have a kind of a reasonable number of other, and maybe we can come and see who they are in a minute. So let's scroll down to the second question. How well do you understand paper mills? From not at all to very well. So nobody as yet is saying very well. Hopefully Jigisha will say very well, so she knows the answers. And then what do you want to find out? So do paper mills affect you? Are you a researcher worried about getting involved in paper mills? Do you represent institutions, so you want to help your researchers to avoid them? Or as a publisher, do you want to protect your journal or others from paper mills? So do we think we've got a good number? How are people getting on? Just give you 1 or 2 minutes more, and then we'll end the poll and I think we can just look at the results. Okay, I think we should end the poll actually. That probably makes sense. And then great. So this is our responses. So and this really is going to help Jigisha to know who's in the audience today. So we have quite a good mix actually. We have researchers, publishers, and people based in institutions. And I'm not sure if you can see the comments, Michael, to see what other people are. On the Understanding Papermills, we've got some people who think they know it well and some people somewhat, and some not at all, so a big mix. And so we hope we'll answer all your questions by the end. And what do you want to find out? So you want to avoid getting involved, or your researchers getting involved with Papermills, or as an editor, want to protect your journal from becoming a target for Papermills. So that's really helpful for us. It shows, I think, everybody's in the right place. And Jigisha is going to be your guide today to take us through her PowerPoint slides and hopefully help us to understand Papermills. So Jigisha, do you want to share your screen? Oh, polls keep popping back. Oh, you're on mute, Jigisha.
I'm so sorry. This worked when we practiced, so I'm just trying to reproduce that. There we go.
Excellent.
I should now be sharing my slides, and then if I put that to presentation view, I hope you can see the presentation view.
That's super.
Perfect. Okay.
Over
Right.
to you.
So am I good to get started, Sarah?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, first of all, Sarah, Victoria, for inviting me to talk today. I'm going to talk about Papermills, what they are, how they work, and why this matters anyway. Why are we doing this session today? Before I delve into the details of Papermills, I just want to give you a little bit of information about United2Act. So Sarah did mention that it's a collaboration between well, supported by STM and COPE, but it's an international collaboration between different stakeholders who have come together to address the issue of paper mills, because I mean, paper mills have been around for a very long time, at least 12 years. They were a novelty. I remember being one of the first people to come across a paper mill and not really knowing what it was and how to deal with it. But over the last decade, it's clear that paper mills are growing and they are becoming a huge issue in academic publishing, and that publishers and journals who are the ones who are finding the paper mills, having to deal with them, need help to prevent them and deal with the whole issue and problem of paper mills. And so United2Act was a movement to get everyone together to understand paper mills and try and do something about them. And there were 5 big areas that United2Act wanted to focus on, and it's created 5 working groups. So working group 1 is about increasing education and awareness, and that's the group I'm involved in. Working group 2 is about improving post-publication corrections. Working group 3 is about improving or starting to do more research on paper mills, so that we can understand better how they operate and how they work. Working group 4 is all about developing trust markers so that we can identify what can be trusted and what can't in terms of the research we read, the research that's published and submitted to journals. And then working group 5 is all about facilitating a dialogue between stakeholders. So as I said, I'm a member of Working Group 1, and our remit is to increase education and awareness. And these are all people in Working Group 1. As you can see, it's a variety of stakeholders from, and it is an international group. And our remit was to create educational tools and resources to make authors, researchers, institutions, funders, publishers, everybody involved in the research process, including the general public who benefit from the research process, get everybody together to fight against paper mills together. And part of what we've done as Working Group 1 is create some resources. So we've created a huge deck of slides which are packed with information about paper mills, and these are available for you to look at on the United2Act website. There's the URL. And the slides are not intended to be just presented as they are. The slides just contain a lot of information, and that information is there for anyone who wants to raise awareness about paper mills to take and use, to create their own slides, to present to their own audiences, to help spread the word about paper mills and what they are all about. The slides cover these main areas, but again, you can pick and choose what it is you want to take out of the resources and present. So today, there's not enough time to go through the entire deck of slides and all the information there. So today, I'm just going to focus on the essentials of paper mills and the mechanics of how they work and the consequences. And we'll talk a little bit about investigations as we go along, and sort of the broader picture of what can be done about paper mills. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to go into the details of paper mills, the who, how, what, where, why, which of paper mills. So let's start off with a definition. And to begin with, we are all using the term paper mills, but paper mills is a colloquial term, and we're all using it now because that's what everybody in the media and generally talking about this phenomenon are using. They're using the term paper mills. But what paper mills are, the more formal definition is the manipulation of the publication process. And this is done by organizations or individuals or groups of individuals. And the aim of these paper mills is to profit from the demand for publications by selling publications. So the people behind paper mills know that researchers, junior researchers, need publications. And so they say, well, look, we can give you a publication. You don't have to actually do any research. You can just buy a publication. You can buy an authorship slot on a manuscript. And we'll make sure that manuscript then gets published. And I'll talk about how they do that in a little later. And the paper mills can sell publications at a huge scale. So hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts can be sold in this way and published. And the problem is the manuscripts, because they don't contain any real research, can be very low value in content or be entirely fabricated. And that has been exacerbated now by the widespread use of generative AI tools. So, I mean, paper mills were using AI technology anyway to generate manuscripts, generate figures, avoid detection by plagiarism detection software. But now, sorry, did somebody say something there that I should, or shall I carry on? Somebody trying to communicate with me there.
You can carry on. I think somebody was unmuted.
Yeah.
Yes, but since 2023, with the widespread public availability of generative AI tools, it's made it much, it's given a boost to paper mills now, because the biggest reason is it's just harder to tell the difference between a genuine researcher who's used a generative AI tool innocently and genuinely as part of their helping them to get their research done, and a paper mill which has attempted to fabricate an image or fabricate a manuscript, and that because of the widespread use of this tool. So this has made the problem even worse. And as part of the things that paper mills do, they may also sell citations as well amongst themselves, or as part of peer review, they might demand that researchers put citations to their own work in their manuscripts. And they might infiltrate peer review processes to make sure that publication is guaranteed. So just to reiterate, this is the really important point to remember is that paper mills are exploiting a research culture, really, where researchers are rewarded for high numbers of publications in known journals over the quality of their research and the quality of their scholarly outputs. So it's all about getting that publication that can be put on a CV rather than the quality of what that publication represents. So how do paper mills work? So paper mills are constantly evolving. So you can't just have experience of a paper mill and think, okay, well, this is how the paper mill operated in this case, and therefore that's how all paper mills will operate. I don't think I've ever worked on two paper mills that have operated in exactly the same way. There are little differences in how they go about achieving what they want to achieve, and they're constantly evolving, because as soon as they know that a journal or a publisher has found out how they work, they will change their practices to try and circumvent the checks that the journal or publisher might put into place. So they find ways to attract customers and generate manuscripts. Of course, once they've got their customers and their manuscripts, these customers want publication in specific journals or known journals which have impact factors or are well known, because again, this is what's rewarded. Publications in high quality journals is what's rewarded, so that's what the customers want. And so paper mills will then find ways to guarantee publication, and then once publication is guaranteed, they'll collect payment. And as I've said, they'll also collect payment for other activities, such as adding citations for other researchers. So how do they go about doing this? So I'm going to turn that question over to you and ask you, this is the first poll question, how do you think paper mills generate manuscripts and find customers? So take it as given that they're using generative AI tools to fabricate manuscripts. So Michael, if you want to launch the poll now, and then I'll read out the options. Okay. So do you think that they generate customers and manuscripts by putting out a call for special issues? Do you think they organize fake conferences? Do you think they pretend to be editing agencies? Do they advertise their services on social media? Or do you think they do all of the above? I'll just give you a few minutes there. That's moving around. I guess everybody who's going to vote has voted. Okay. Great. So brilliant. So 80% of you have said all of the above, and that's absolutely right. So they do all of these things, and I'll explain how after the next question. So can you see, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask Michael here. Michael, if I press stop sharing, oh, no, sorry, you've moved on to the next question. That's perfect. So I'm going to move on to the next question. How do you think paper mills guarantee that their manuscripts will get published? So do you think they recruit corrupt academics to act as guest editors? Do they bribe journal editors? Do they manipulate peer review by fabricating email addresses? Do they create predatory journals? Or do you think they do all of the above? Okay, so it looks like the numbers have stopped moving. And again, yes, most of you are saying all of the above, which is absolutely right. All of the above methods are used. And some of you thought that they manipulate peer review and create predatory journals. So I'll talk about predatory journals in a minute, but what I'm going to do now is going to go back over these two questions and just explain in more detail. So let me just close this window and go back. Right, so the first question was, how do they generate manuscripts and find customers? So what they're trying to do is they're trying to get publications in legitimate journals. And so here for A, putting out a call for papers for a special issue, organising a fake conference, what they're doing here is that these are activities of corrupt academics who are approaching legitimate journals with proposals for a special issue or proposals for fake conferences. And then they can guarantee publication because they will have control of peer review, because special issues the peer review is managed by a guest editor, a third-party guest editor. So a corrupt academic can go to a journal and say, I have this idea for a special issue on this specific topic. I know the experts in the field. Here's a proposal. And they're all corrupt. They're all part of the paper mill. So then the guest editor can act as an agent of the paper mill and just let papers through without proper peer review in exchange for money. And so that's one way of guaranteeing publication. And similarly with fake conferences, they can go to a journal and say, we are organising a conference, we'd like to publish the outputs of our conference in the journal, can we come to an agreement? That's normal practice. But again, peer review is happening outside of the journal's normal processes. The conference organisers say, oh, we've got a committee of academics who will do the peer review, so you don't need to do anything, you just publish the proceedings. But none of those proceedings are genuine, and none of them were properly peer reviewed. Then pretending to be an editing agency, slightly different approach here. Here, they outwardly look like a normal editing agency that's offering writing services and editing services for researchers who are saying, oh, we'll help you polish up your manuscript so that it's ready for publication. We'll hold your hand through the submission process. That's outwardly what they're doing. Again, that's all legitimate. Lots of agencies, there are lots of good, legitimate editing agencies that help researchers do that. But some are doing this outwardly, but then covertly will offer publication for a fee. And what they're doing here is that they are hijacking the peer review system by creating the email address, fabricating email addresses. And then lots of researchers have seen adverts for their paper mill services on social media. They don't even pretend to hide the fact that they are a paper mill. They just openly advertise, there's a slot for an author on this paper. And these are just the things that we have seen. So there are probably other ways that they manage to do this that we haven't come across yet. And it's constantly changing and constantly moving. And then guaranteeing publication. Well, as I've said, a big part of it is the corrupt editors and academics who are actually agents of the paper mills and are not conducting peer review properly, and then manipulating peer review by fabricating email addresses. So here, what the editing agency will do is will say to the researcher, we will make sure that your paper passes peer review. They make up an email address that looks very much like a real academic's email address, and then they will suggest that name of the real academic with a fake email address as a potential peer reviewer for the article, for the manuscript. The editor thinks, oh, this academic looks perfect, and uses the email address that the editing agency has provided to invite that peer reviewer. But of course, that email address goes straight back to the editing agency, who can then fabricate a peer review report that is very positive. What about this? What about creating predatory journals? So paper mills and predatory journals are often confused. They're often thought to be the same thing, but they're not quite. They're slightly different. So predatory publishing is is where journals or publishers are created, but these are separate entities from legitimate publishers and journals. And they publish in exchange for a fee with no peer review or quality control mechanisms at all. And they're characterized by false or misleading information on their websites, a lack of transparency about their processes and charges, and they use aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. So the difference is that predatory journals are separate, they're not legitimate journals, and some researchers might just want a publication. They don't care where, they just want a publication. And they could knowingly submit to a predatory journal, pay their fee, get their publication. And that's sometimes known as vanity publishing, in that there's no real quality control there. Sometimes predatory publishers and journals will imitate real journals to fool researchers into thinking that they are submitting to real journals, but they're not. Whereas Papermills, mostly the ones we hear about, are aiming to achieve publication in legitimate journals, because the researchers want these publications in journals with impact factors or journals that are known to be of high prestige within the field. So there is a slight difference, they're not interchangeable. So who is behind Papermills? So as I said previously, they can be non-academics or academics, and the non-academics, it seems, are doing this in a sort of very focused, organized, large-scale way. You know, large global entities that are dedicated entirely to papermill activity, employing people, you know, engaging people as their agents to go out there and make papermills work. And editing agencies, again, probably run by non-academics, doing the same thing. But then also, what academics are also getting involved. So there are groups of researchers within institutions who think, well, hang on, we could make a lot of money here if we run our own paper mill process. And even individuals have been known to run little mini authorship for sale, little mini paper mills, just as themselves, offering authorship on manuscripts. And but you can imagine now with generative AI, this is very easy to do. An individual can just sit at their computer and create manuscripts and then go into their institution and make lots of money by selling authorship on these manuscripts in various ways. So that is just a very fast overview of how paper mills work and who's behind them. So how are they detected? How are they identified? So, I mean, the most commonly known, I mean, the reason why we know about paper mills is that they are journals and publishers have had to investigate and retract paper mill articles. And they can be discovered either through the journal or publisher's own internal quality control mechanisms, which spot suspicious features. And one of the very first paper mills I worked on was discovered by a staff member within the publisher who noticed there was something very strange about the email addresses. So the email address was not matching, you know, the name on the email address was different from the actual person who's apparently peer-reviewed manuscript. And then that opened up a whole investigation into what had been going on. But commonly now, paper mills are detected by the research community. So researchers, readers who are reading the manuscripts are noticing that these manuscripts have got really problematic content. And some researchers who we term sleuths in the industry are actively dedicating their time to actively investigate and look for certain features across many manuscripts, and then are alerting journals and publishers that this content is suspicious. What about researchers? Well, as I've mentioned, some researchers have noticed problems with published articles and are actively acting as sleuths. We've already mentioned that researchers see adverts on social media, but probably the biggest way is just by word of mouth via their peers. There seems to be given the scale of paper mills, the number of submissions and the number of publications that are achieved by paper mills, there seems to be a very sort of widespread network, probably by word of mouth, that allows researchers to become aware of paper mills and their activity, and then be able to take part in that activity. What about institutions, research integrity offices? How are they identifying paper mills? So the issue here, and one of the reasons why United2Act was created and why I'm doing this webinar today, is to raise awareness, because one of the key things that the reason why paper mills are so successful is that they operate under the radar, because it never occurs to anyone that, oh, this kind of activity could actually happen, and so nobody checks. And this is what's happening at the moment with institutions. So publishers and journals have cottoned on. They are aware of what's going on. They're starting to look. They're starting to find ways to detect and prevent. Institutions still have not quite grasped that there might be researchers within their institutions who are running paper mills. So I have not come across a case where an institution was the first entity, the first stakeholder to say, hey, here's a paper mill. Most of the time, institutions become aware because they're informed via the journal or publisher investigations that there has been paper mill activity amongst their academics. So whereabouts do paper mills operate, and what topics do they cover? So paper mills will operate in areas where there's a huge pressure to publish and to obtain jobs, funding, promotion, and where there are cash incentives to produce publications. Alarmingly, actually, I don't think this is true anymore. I think paper mills are operating globally. I came across a paper mill operating in a UK institution quite recently. So I don't think we can point to a specific area of the world and say that's just where they happen. But I think we have to assume that they can happen anywhere. And also the researchers who are buying authorship from paper mills can come from around the world as well. So there can be a paper mill run in one place, in one part of the world, but there are authors from all over the world who are taking part in that paper mill and buying authorship from that paper mill. And which research fields are targeted on paper mills? Well, originally, I mean, the early paper mills were in medicine, biochemistry, and particularly areas where it was easy to generate and fabricate convincing looking figures. But now, again, I think we have to assume that paper mills are occurring across all sorts of fields and specialties: genetics, oncology, pharmacology, computer sciences, nanotechnology, social sciences as well, law, economics, and many more. Any type of research where it's easy to fabricate images are vulnerable. Any fields or article types where there is no quantitative data collection. So, for example, one of the article types that is really at risk now is the review article type, a narrative review, which can be generated in minutes using generative AI. You just put in a prompt asking it to summarize the research in a particular field, and you've got a review of the literature. And I've seen articles submitted and even published that are clearly just a list of the published literature with little summaries of what the literature found. And clearly these weren't written by a human with any desire to convey any more knowledge or understanding or insight. It was just generated by a generative AI tool. So that's a very vulnerable article type. So any field of research is at risk of becoming a target for paper mills. So I'll just pause there. So just to remind you, the motivation between the driving force behind paper mills is the pressure to publish, because it's publication in legitimate journals with impact factors, etc., which is rewarded. So it's a research culture which is driving paper mills now. Paper mills are generating manuscripts and finding customers, and then finding ways to circumvent the normal quality control mechanisms of journals, such as getting involved in peer review or hijacking peer review by fabricating email addresses, as an example. And paper mills are operating all over the world, and authors and researchers from all over the world are using the services of paper mills. So in the next half, so I've sort of got halfway through the presentation there. So in the next half of the presentation, I'm just going to talk through some of the consequences from the perspective of different stakeholders. So let's start with the researcher. So we have an early career researcher who's thinking about applying for their next role, but they only have 4 papers that are published, and they don't feel that they will be a competitive candidate in their field of study. And then they hear via a colleague that there is a website which guarantees quick publications in reputable journals. So this sounds very interesting to them. And this is the important thing, feeling as though they have no other option, they use the service and pay for authorship, an authorship slot on a paper. And this is really important because if everybody is doing it, so if a researcher finds themselves in an environment where their peers are doing this, they're buying papers, that honest researcher is going to be hugely disadvantaged because they're not going to have the publication records that their peers have. And then they feel disadvantaged and at risk of not getting the promotions and jobs that they need. And so they are compelled to take part in this activity too. So this is exactly what happens to this researcher. So they've bought authorship now, and they have a couple of publications, and they feel great about it because the experience was very quick, and they want to improve their career opportunities, and so they do it again. So they buy a couple of publications, and they get offered a job. However, before they start this job, this new role, they are contacted by the journal in which their publications were published, because the journal has concern about the published papers. And the journal's investigation reveals that the researcher was involved in paper mill activity. And so the researcher's papers are retracted very quickly. And this has consequences for the poor researcher now, because now their potential new employer has withdrawn their offer. They don't get the job following reference checks. And now the researcher has facing the prospect of not having a job at all because it's the end of their current role, and they're applying for other things without much success. And the researcher wasn't aware that involvement in paper mill activity in this way could affect their future activities. Sorry, I skipped ahead there. And in a lot of ways, you think, oh, well, the researcher was bad. You know, they took part in paper mill activity, and you think, oh, yeah, that's true. But also, you can understand how they were in a situation where they felt they had no choice. And then because it was their work that was retracted, they're the ones who are called out for taking part in the paper mill, not the organisers of the paper mill. So it's as if the real bad people, the real bad actors are getting away with it, while it's the customers who are buying the publications who are the ones who are getting called out by the publication of retractions. What about consequences for the publisher? So in this case, it's a similar scenario. The publisher of a journal is contacted by a reader about concerns about the content of several of its journals. And this reader has concerns because there are suspicious patterns and similarities across the publications. And this is typical of paper mills. If a paper mill has found a way to manipulate images in a certain way, you might see that several publications have got very similar issues around image manipulation. So that the patterns are often what give away that a paper mill is in operation. So the publisher reviews the content of the article as well as the peer review process for each article. And the publisher finds inconsistent authorship and untraceable data and violation of ethics standards within the papers. So, you know, authorship is the hallmark, because that's what the paper mill is doing. It's selling authorship. So sometimes what happens is that authorship is changed just after revision. So manuscript is submitted, you know, peer review is probably manipulated, and then when the authors respond to the peer reviewer reports, which are easy because the peer review reports weren't real anyway, and then when they submit the revised version of the manuscript, they add on authors in the hope that no one will notice. And that's often the case, because who reads the authorship more than once? You know, you read the authorship, but nobody regularly checks whether the authorship on the revised manuscript is the same as the one on the submitted manuscript. And then similarly, when the manuscript has been accepted for, editorially accepted and goes off to be published into the production phase, that's another opportunity for new authors to appear on the manuscript, because a paper mill knows that nobody's going to be checking the authorship anymore. And so these little inconsistencies are a hallmark of paper mill activity. And of course, there's untraceable data because there never was any data in the manuscript in the first place. It was fabricated. And violation of ethical standards means that papers might contain information about the ethics of the study, but because they don't understand, because the study was not done, the actual statements about the ethics are inconsistent or incongruous and don't make sense. And in this scenario, the publisher also notices that there were irregularities concerning peer reviewer activity and citation manipulation, as I've described earlier. All of this signals paper mill involvement. So for the publisher, they cross-check further, and they find that there have been some of the reviewers have also been involved in other journals containing similar concerning features. So here's that network again. The paper mill has managed to get away. They try one journal, they get away with it. They think, oh, the editorial processes are not that stringent in this publisher. Let's try and infiltrate other journals within this publisher as well. And they manage to infiltrate and form this network throughout lots of journals. So the publisher has to launch a wider investigation across their portfolio and identify systematic manipulation that led to the publication of hundreds of articles across different journals. And this has happened. This isn't uncommon anymore. And so the publisher retracts hundreds of articles across multiple journals, with more retractions anticipated as ongoing investigations generate more leads. So the more you look, the more you find, and it consumes so much in terms of resources and time investigating a paper mill once you've been infiltrated by one. What about this is still the publisher. So the incident creates negative attention from many scholarly mainstream media organizations, and the publisher faces significant amount of criticism as well. The publisher has to close down 2 journals as a result of the reputational damage caused by paper mill activity, and the number of submissions to its journals also drop because of this. So significant consequences there for the publisher. What about the institution? So as I mentioned earlier, I've never come across an institution finding a paper mill, because I think mostly because most institutions are not aware that these paper mills might be operating within their organizations. So normally an institution will become aware because a publisher has informed them. And that's the case here in this scenario. A publisher informs the Research Integrity Office at a researcher's university about potential problems with the researcher's publications. And so the Research Integrity Office starts a formal investigation, and the investigation concludes that the researcher had bought authorship on 2 publications. But they can only conclude this because the researcher confesses to buying authorship. So for institutions, it's very difficult to investigate and prove that somebody is involved in paper mill activity if they are not monitoring the research outputs of their academics, looking at what they are apparently publishing. And it's a huge undertaking to do that anyway, so it's very difficult to investigate things. But fortunately, in this case, the researcher just confesses straight away that, yes, they did buy authorship. So the researcher is referred to the university's HR processes for disciplinary action, but the publicity caused by the incident causes significant reputational damage to the university as well, and it faces scrutiny from the academic community for academic misconduct amongst its employees. And then this can have repercussions as well for the institution. They may not get funding in the future. It can have serious consequences for them. And then finally, the final stakeholder I'm going to talk about is the funder. And again, the funders have not been particularly involved at all in Papermills or Papermill investigations. So I think they're very much unaware of the whole phenomenon of Papermills. So in this scenario, there's a medical research charity that funded a research project that a researcher was working on. And it's alerted by the researcher's university that the researcher they funded has committed misconduct by taking part in papermill activity. So in this case, the researcher had the funding and all they had to do was do the research, but rather than do the research, they thought, oh, I'll just buy a paper, I won't bother to do any research. So several of the researcher's articles were retracted. And what the researcher had done was cited the charity as the funder of some of their fabricated articles to give the work the appearance of credibility. And Papermills do this, they'll make various declarations and acknowledgements to make the paper look more legitimate. So the charity had previously featured the researcher in its communications, promoting the project as a testament of the charity's commitment to fostering early career researchers. But beyond the immediate embarrassment that the retractions raised, questions about the charity's due diligence and oversight of the claimed outputs of their funding were raised, and concerns were expressed over the reliability of other research outcomes apparently funded by the charity. So in all of these cases, everybody's suffering consequences, everybody's suffering embarrassment and reputational damage and sort of general unpleasantness because of their researchers have been involved in Papermills. But the full extent of Papermill activity and how much it has contaminated the literature is unknown. I've seen figures for, cited 2% to 20% of the literature. We don't know, but everybody agrees that whatever we're finding, whatever we're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. And there's a lot out there that just hasn't been discovered yet. And again, another reason for doing this webinar and for Working Group 1 to have created these slides and these tools is to raise awareness, because if you're not aware, you won't know it's happening under your nose. You have to go and look for it. And of course, the consequences go way beyond academia and individual stakeholder reputations and funding. I mean, yes, that's unpleasant for the people involved, but the consequences are much, much more serious than that. And that's because the scholarly literature informs policies and practices that directly affect the everyday lives and well-being of people. It affects us all, whether we're scientists or academics, or not. And Papermills have far-reaching negative impacts on society as a whole. So fraudulent research can affect all aspects of life. It leads to compromised decision-making. If you're making decisions based on the research that's out there and that research is flawed, obviously the decision-making is based on flawed information. Investment in projects can fail because, again, the investment was based on flawed information. So there can be huge economic losses as well. There are adverse effects on public health, and medicine, and the impact on medical research is often cited as one of the severe consequences of Papermills, because research is published making false claims based on fabricated publications. But these publications then get included in systematic reviews of the evidence out there on certain treatments, and then it's found that the treatments are not supported by the research, and people then can be harmed because they are given treatments that were never legitimately shown to work. So that can have devastating consequences for people and for public health. And the whole thing results in a decline in technological advancements and innovation. It is actually breaking the scientific process. This is what Papermills are so serious. They're breaking our process. That is actively stopping us from moving forward with advancements and innovation, which is very serious for everybody. So I've done a huge amount of talking there in that amount of time. So I'm going to pause here, and we've got our final question. So having told you what paper mills are, having talked about all of the consequences, what are we going to do about it? But before we even talk about what to do about it, who is responsible for addressing the problem of paper mills? And take it as given that journals and publishers are responsible because they publish the research and have to retract it. So Michael, if I could ask you to launch this question, who is responsible for addressing the problem of paper mills? Is it institutions, funders, governments and policymakers, individual researchers, all of the above, or none of the above? It looks like we've stopped. Yeah, great. So no, we seem to have stopped. So some people think institutions in particular, some people think individual researchers, most people think all of the above, which is absolutely right. I don't think it's possible for one stakeholder to address this problem. And in fact, that's what the statement is from United2Act. Paper mills are a real threat to the integrity of the scholarly record, but collective effort is needed because no individual stakeholder can solve this problem alone. So I'm just going to go back to this slide here and just talk through these options. So it should be everyone. At the moment, it's mostly researchers who are doing the research into finding these problematic papers and telling journals and publishers about them. And then journals and publishers are acting or not on the information that they're given. Institutions have a really important role here because remember the corrupt academics that are working at institutions. So here's an opportunity for institutions to become more involved in raising awareness about paper mills within their organizations and also having ways of detecting the activity within their organizations. So for example, one idea might be to have a safe way that researchers can flag that paper mills are operating within their institution. So if they're told, oh, you can get a publication by paying for it, and they're an honest researcher, they should have a way of flagging that situation to the institution without them coming to any harm or feeling threatened. And that's just one thing that institutions could implement that might help stop paper mills getting hold within institutions. Governments and policymakers obviously is very difficult because this is a global problem. Individual researchers, I've talked about individual researchers acting as sleuths and actively going out there and looking for problematic papers. But the other thing individual researchers can do is when they conduct their own research is to do it as transparently as possible. So sticking to all the policies and research integrity practices to make sure that their research can withstand scrutiny should they inadvertently get caught up in a paper mill investigation, because that's the other problem, is that innocent researchers get caught up in paper mill investigations and their work gets retracted because they're not able to prove that their research is genuine and that they really did it. But there are ways that researchers can conduct their research and keep records of what they did and transparently share their data and share their methods and things related to reproducibility that would protect them from false accusations of being involved in this kind of activity. Prevention, so prevention, a huge topic, a whole hour's worth of webinar here just in talking about prevention. So as I've mentioned, researchers need to follow best practice, keep good records, be transparent about their research to prevent being wrongly accused of paper mill activity. Journals and publishers need to have really good editorial policies. Often it's sort of sloppy policies or sloppy processes that paper mills can then exploit and take advantage of. So you need to tighten up your policies and processes. Collaboration is really important between all stakeholders to help investigations work smoothly, sharing of information. But we really ought to elevate the status of research integrity itself. I mean, recently I was talking to a group of PhD students who'd just started their PhD courses. They've been doing it for 6 months. And I asked them if they'd had any research integrity training, and they said yes, they had, but they admitted that nobody took it seriously. They just it was just a box ticking exercise. It was something they had to do, so they just did it, but they didn't actually think too deeply about it. None of them had heard about initiatives like Open Science or how to share their data, or ORCID, or DORA. You know, they hadn't heard about all of these initiatives that are happening in publishing to improve the integrity of research. So this is very alarming. This is sort of quite upsetting, and thinking, well, why aren't they're PhD students and they're thinking of research integrity as a box ticking exercise. So the status of research integrity needs to be elevated so that it is treated seriously, and this might be achieved by better training earlier at the undergraduate level. But of course, ultimately, the way to prevent paper mills is to completely take away the demand that the paper mills are exploiting, and this is by changing the research culture that rewards behaviours that paper mills can exploit. So this is not rewarding publications in journals with high impact factors, or not rewarding numbers of publications, but actually focusing on behaviours that support research integrity and quality research. So nearly to come to the end there. I just wanted to end by flagging the additional resources. As I said, there's so much information about this, and Working Group 1 has put together a lot of information in the form of slides, which I didn't have time to present all of that today, but there are slides specifically for authors and researchers and how they can avoid paper mills. I mean, the easy answer to that question is that obviously do the research and publish your research you've actually done. If someone asks you to pay to get something published, don't do it. There's also information for journal and institution collaboration available there as well. Remember, there are COPE guidance. There are COPE guidelines on investigating paper mills. So if you're a publisher or a journal who's already been affected by a paper mill, there is guidance there. And then there's also the outputs of the other working groups available for you to look at. All of this is still work in progress, so it's up for improvement based on feedback. So if you want to go to the United2Act website, look at these resources, look at the outputs of the other groups, and provide feedback, that would be very, very welcome. And I've just included here flagged Working Group 5, which is facilitating a dialogue between stakeholders, because this is relevant to the webinar I've just presented, because it covers bibliography of the terminology used and how different stakeholders might work together. So that's worth looking at as well. So with that, I just want to end again by acknowledging everybody who has taken part in Working Group 1's work and who has taken part in populating all of the slides that are available as Working Group 1's output. Thank you. That is the end of my what I'm going to say. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you, Jigisha. That was wonderful, and I've learned so much myself, so amazing. So I'm going to hand over to Victoria, who's going to host the Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Jigisha. That was great. It was nice to see those materials in action after so many months of working on them. Great. So we have a couple questions in here. the first question came in and somebody did respond to it, but it was earlier in your presentation. Somebody asked if a normal researcher sold his or her work to one other person, would this be detected and considered a paper mill?
So if one researcher sold their work to another?
So just like a direct transaction with one researcher to another researcher.
I would say that was highly questionable. I mean, it doesn't fit into the definition of a paper mill because it's not churning out lots of papers. But my question is, why on earth are you doing this? You know, this is not this is good practice. This is not best practice.
Yeah.
Under what circumstances would you be doing it? And if it's a legitimate practice, then it should be transparently declared in the written up version of the research. So in a manuscript, if a researcher obtained some, say, for example, data from somewhere and had to pay for it, that has to be declared in the manuscript. They cannot pass it off as their own data. My question would be, why this is
what's the benefit?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, great. Then we had a question about tools. So which are the best tools to use to detect paper mills? Now, people have been doing a lot of work developing tools, but can you comment a little bit about some of that work that's going on and tools that you've seen that have been promising, perhaps?
So, so I do have some issues with tools. It is a very difficult endeavor to create a tool that's going to detect and stop paper mills. There are lots of tools available now. I mean, the STM Research Integrity Hub, you can just go and have a look at that to see what the work that's being done around tools. There are different tools are looking at different things. So some tools are looking at images. Some tools will be looking at the text content, so focusing on the manuscript content. There are some tools that are looking at patterns of author histories, you know, whether the authors have a history of retractions in the past. Some tools will be looking at patterns of submissions to journals. So there are so many different red flags and aspects and markers that these tools can look at. There's no one tool that can be sort of held up as saying, oh, this is the tool that's going to find all paper mills, because it's going to depend on the paper mill. If you have a paper mill where you're seeing fabricated images, then, or you're worried that you're going to be targeted by, you know, a paper mill that fabricates images, then that's the tool for you. But if you are getting inundated with review articles, which is just, you know, may not have images, it's just text, it's just AI generated text, then maybe the tool for you there is something that will detect AI generated content or something that would spot spikes and submissions. So that's the problem with tools, is that you actually need to understand paper mills very well to be able to decide which tools are going to work for you. So there isn't one tool that's going to solve the problem, I don't think.
Yeah. Great. Do we have a question about retracted paper? So when someone's published paper gets retracted, do the citations that this paper obtains still count? Technically, the retracted paper should not contribute to the H-index of an author, correct?
That's right. So once a paper is retracted, it's out of the published record. So it shouldn't be cited. And it shouldn't count towards the H-index. I mean, they do, because it's very difficult to police and prevent. And sometimes articles are still cited even if they are retracted, because readers don't realize that they're retracted. There are lots of reasons why that might happen. But once it's retracted, it's out of the published record, and therefore should not count towards a H-index or anything else, and should not be cited.
In your opinion, what could publishers be doing differently to kind of address paper mills? I mean, you talked a lot about publishers often being alerted to the fact that there, you know, is paper mill activity in their journals by sleuths. Can you think of anything that publishers could be doing differently or should think about trialing moving forward to kind of combat the rise of paper mills in their journals?
I mean, publishers are a part of the problem, because the whole reason why paper mills started and I think managed to get hold is because of sloppy practices and sloppy
Mm.
processes. I think there was this really naive thinking that you could accept things at face value. And of course, academics wouldn't be dishonest because they're after the truth. You know, there's this whole sort of culture and mentality that, of course, everybody's doing things for good reasons and idealistic reasons. So there's that, and then there's also sloppy practices. So simple things like, the fabricated email addresses is one of those simple things there, where the editor is using email addresses without verifying them to make sure that they belong to the actual person that they think they're inviting. I mean, I'm calling it a sloppy practice, but bear in mind also that everybody's really busy, so it's having the time to do that. And editors are sort of just using emails provided because they haven't got time to go away and verify. But then that in itself is a problem, because everybody wants to do everything too fast. And if we want to do science properly, we have to slow down so that we can do all the checks properly. So slowing down is one thing. Having proper policies that are properly implemented is another thing. Making sure that your processes don't have any loopholes where things can happen without anybody noticing. So like the authors being added without anybody noticing. Papermills got to get away with it because nobody checks. They know nobody checks. Not checking what your guest editors are doing. And Papermills get away with it because nobody's going to question what the guest editor has been up to. Nobody's going to say, hey, editor, well, let's see what you've been doing. Nobody's doing any spot checks of their activities. So there's a lot there that's just happening that nobody externally, is verifying. Because it's all about speed. And we have to slow down and do those checks. It's not a popular point of view, but I think that's the reality.
No, there is that tension there because there is so much pressure on publishers as well to speed things up. Everybody wants there's a question in here, how long does it take for a paper to be published in a good journal on average? Well, how long is a piece of string? It depends is the answer to that. It depends on how many rounds of peer review. And we shouldn't be thinking about speed. We should be thinking about quality. We should be thinking about these types of things. But it is hard because everyone's under pressure in the system. The researcher, the editors, the publishers, etc. So it is.
I think it's down to researchers themselves, really, because I think as long as researchers are saying we want fast publication, we want fast turnaround times, publishers and journals won't slow down because why would they? Because they're there to serve the community. So once the community is saying, I don't want to be caught up in a paper mill investigation. I don't want my research questioned. I've spent 2 years doing my research. I don't want someone coming along and saying, oh, that's fabricated. So I want publishers and journals to find mechanisms for showing that my research is valid, that I did it. And this is around sort of open science and sort of data things like that. So, but it has to come from the researchers for the publishers and journals to want to do it. Because otherwise they won't want to do it, because then the researchers won't go to them to publish their research. So it's a sort of supply demand kind of thing. That's the issue.
So do you think that the wider adoption of open science practices would be one of the best medicines that we could take in terms of combating this?
Certainly. I think open science is but my personal view is that open science is the key. Because with open science, you can show the whole provenance of your manuscript. You should be able to show first draft, various iterations of your manuscript, and all the other stuff that goes on before research is conducted. So, from my perspective, my medical hat on, there would be a protocol, there would be an application for ethics approval. Before all of that, there would be records of recruitment, there would be data sets, then there would be your first draft, there would be revisions. There's so much information there that is never shared, but I think researchers now need to be prepared to share that information. Not if they don't want to share it publicly, at least share it for verification purposes.
Yeah.
You know, so that when they submit, and if you can imagine a scenario, say 5 years from now, where they're competing with fabricated manuscripts, so they want to submit, and other researchers are submitting fabricated manuscripts, and the journal editor is faced with deciding, well, which one do I trust and believe? They will ask the author, prove this is real research. It's going to be the ones who can prove it, which are the ones that are going to get published. I mean, if I was now a journal editor, that's what I would be thinking, because I'm thinking I can't tell whether this manuscript is real or not. And I will be thinking, well, what policies can I put into place to make sure that I'm not inadvertently publishing fabricated research? I'm going to start asking my authors to show the provenance of their manuscripts. And they don't need to do it publicly, but if they show it to me, at least I am reassured that this is real research. And I think that is the answer. So open science practices and even open peer review is another one. Because then that will completely expose the whole fabricated peer review reports or no peer review as well.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of open peer review. Good. We have one more question here, and that is, can you please explain how and what institutions should do to contain paper mills? So you talked about a few brief examples, but can you expand on that?
Yeah, so I mean, the issue is that most institutions won't know whether their academics are running paper mills at all. You know, they're not aware of it. I don't think institutions can do anything other than inform their researchers about paper mills and tell them not to take part in them when the paper mills are being run by non-academics. So because there's this whole world out there of non-academics who are exploiting this demand, and there's nothing much you can do about that other than not take part. So they should tell the researchers, just don't take part. There should be mechanisms in place for researchers to flag paper mill activity within an institution safely. So if a researcher is approached or a researcher knows that their peers are doing this and buying authorship, there should be ways of alerting the institution to this so that the institution then can dive in and investigate. I think institutions can also have more oversight of the research output. So, you know, even saying that anything that a researcher publishes with that institution as an affiliation the institution has to be aware of it in some way, a way of monitoring. And this would prevent, or at least that would be a means of detecting excessive publications, because one of the flags is that a researcher suddenly has managed to do like 10 studies and 10 publications in a year. How is that even possible if that's real research? That's not you know, that's going to be a red flag. So the institution needs to be able to see that happening within its own, you know, employees and researchers, and say, well, how did you do this? Show us your working. How did you manage 10 publications in a year? And changing the reward system, which I keep on saying, stop rewarding publications for the sake of it, and start rewarding the good practices that will ensure transparency, reproducibility, open science. Start rewarding the researchers brave enough to do that. You know, without being told. The ones who are doing that are the ones who should be getting the promotions, because they're the proper scientists.
No, because I was going to say some institutions would be over the moon if they had a really productive researcher that was publishing a ton, you know. So there is that, again, that tension there between, you know, kind of the reward system and rankings and all that, and the problem of paper mills. Yeah. Great. Well, I think that's it on the questions today. So, I mean, Jigisha, thank you so much. That was such a great and comprehensive session. I kept on thinking, oh, I need to have a couple seed questions, but every time I would write one down, you would answer the question. So luckily other people had questions in the chat. So back to you, Sarah.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to ask Jigisha actually, is there in the toolkit, are there kind of best practice like sites where people have policies in place that you point to, or is that something you could consider? Because some publishers or journals or institutions may like to look at what's considered best practice in terms of policies.
That's a good
So
idea.
we do have, so as well as the slides right at the end, there's a list of references, and included in that is a link to a spreadsheet, because we gathered all the information we could find around paper mills that anyone had published. So this includes guidelines, blog posts, even stories of how, you know, publishers have handled cases, big cases that have had lots of media attention. And then they've talked about what they did. They talked about how they managed it. So all that information was the first thing that the group did, was we just did a search. And so there is a link to a spreadsheet within those resources right at the end to where it's all there, hopefully.
That sounds great. So show your working. So
Um,
super. So just before we get to the final thank yous, we wanted to ask our final poll questions. Michael, can we launch the poll? Final poll? Okay, so how well do you now understand paper mills? And we hope we've made some progress here. So we'd like you to answer these now, whether not at all, slightly, somewhat, well, or very well. Oh, this is looking good. Wonderful. Thank you for being an interactive audience. We really valued that. It's really helped us to shape what we've covered today and to think about what needs to come next. So I think people have stopped voting. So essentially, I think we've made some progress. So we don't have anybody in the not at all category or slightly. And you can always rewatch this if you want to catch up again. And then for future Research for Life webinars, we wanted to ask you what topics would be useful for you in research integrity and ethics. So anything you feel that would be good for a follow-on webinar. We thought we'd consider that there might be more people wanted to know. So that will help us think about what comes next. So I will just close.
Just
Go on.
before,
Yeah.
I see somebody's asked for a link to the resources I was talking about, or the list of resources, which I can put in the chat if.
Super. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, and the recording will go up on the Research for Life website in due course. So just remains for me to say final thank yous. So thanks to Jigisha for an excellent talk and superb slides, really clear. I feel like I understand areas I didn't before, and everybody's learned so much, you can tell from the comments. So thank you, Victoria, too, for hosting our Q&A and helping put the session together. Thank you to Michael from iToka for hosting the webinar, managing our polling. First time I've done that, so that was an experience. And as mentioned earlier, the recording will be on the Research for Life website. And thank you all for attending and make it interactive and for your good questions. And we hope to see you all at our next Research for Life webinar. So thank you so much.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.